There I am. Oh, boy, oh boy. Tech issues today. We'll try something else. So, hey, here we are, everybody. I had to go in kind of through the back door on this one with the tech issues. I just could not seem to connect through that other one. So I created a new one. Here I am. Tell everyone to refresh their page. Wait a minute. Maybe I'll get on there and tell them to refresh their page. No, never mind. Okay, at least I see I'm on live there. Okay, let's do this. Oh, for goodness sake, tech problems everywhere. 3, 2, 1. Hey, you're not going to want to mix it up with me today unless you bring the right method. Because when your baking goes bad, there's an obvious culprit. And I'll tell you who to blame and how to fix it today on the Carefree Cooks Code. I'm Chef Todd Moore, and this is the Carefree Cooks Code, every Tuesday live at noon Eastern. Here's our challenge. How can home cooks cook freely with creativity, confidence, and pride while ignoring recipes and still impressing themselves and others with what they cook? Well, the answer is found in becoming empowered with how cooking works, using dependable and repeatable methods of cooking that work for any ingredient, for any diet, and any desire, just like chefs do. And we'll know we've cracked it when everyone sees cooking as an exciting and rewarding way to improve their relationships, their lifestyles, and their health through better food and cooking. This is the Carefree Cooks Code. Hey, welcome back to the Carefree Cooks Code, everyone. This is the weekly show for the methods, the techniques, and insights into better food and cooking. We're live every Tuesday at noon Eastern. At least we try to be, if the tech cooperates. Hey, if you're looking for past videos, you can go to my archive on Facebook. It's facebook.com/chef.todd.more/videos. And notice the schedule as well. We'll be live again this Thursday for a cook and chat along. If you're a Carefree cook in our Carefree Cooks community on Facebook, look for the poll that's going on right now because you can decide what we cook and chat about on Thursday. And if you want to see what I'm cooking and a photo of it, how I did it as well, here's the tuna tostadas from last night. Follow me on Instagram as well because I'm a carefree cook. I create my own recipes. I bring friends and family together. I learn every time I cook because I create my own cooking style. I love practicing my pro methods and I wind up loving my cooking, something like that. Hey everyone, baking is big right now. You get into this time of year and I just can't believe the number of people getting back into their kitchens and finding great comfort and joy in the baked goods that they create there. There are few things to me as pride-provoking as creating perfect baked goods. And I told you last week that I really wanted to be a professional baker, but because I was fascinated with the fact that just a few ingredients were responsible for every single thing that you bake, depending on how you mix them up, that's why I wanted to be a baker. But it didn't work out that way, if you see last week's episode. But, you know, so much can go wrong with your baked goods before it even goes into the oven. And that's what we're going to focus on today. But first, I've got a true or false for you. Tell me in the comment section below, please, true or false. Butter is 15% water. True or false in the comment section below. All right, last I was talking about, we talked about the fact last week that there are only 7 ingredients that make up all of baking. Pretty much every single thing that you ever wanted to bake is made with some combination of these 7 standard ingredients. So how can just 7 ingredients make up everything you can possibly bake? Well, how can just a few primary colors make up every other color? How can just 26 letters make up every single word? We went through that last week because it's all about how you mix them together, how you combine the colors, in what order you put the letters that makes your stuff either brilliant or incredibly confusing. How you mix things is most important. And there are just 5 mixing methods. And once you know them, once you know their purpose, their goal in mixing, then you have a pro baker's command of baking, even if you never become a pro baker like me. So let's review the 7 ingredients from last week's Carefree Cooks Code. Do you remember EFFFLLS? EFFFLLS. I make my class recite it. EFFFLLS. Egg, fat, flour, fat, flavor, liquid, leavener, sugar. These are the 7 ingredients. And this is the last slide that I left you with 7 days ago. Notice at the bottom of the slide also, right there, it says, with proper mixing methods creates every baked goods. With proper mixing methods. And ultimately, this is the most important aspect of cooking. And I know everyone else who's teaching baking out there will tell you that the most important thing is time and temperature. What the oven temperature is and how long you bake it for. And they spend no time, these other instructors, they spend no time at all on the mixing. You just throw everything in the mixer, mix it together, and then be very careful about what time and temperature. I mean, it doesn't not come down to how long you bake things at what temperature. And as a matter of fact, this is the absolute worst way to bake and the worst way to cook. And it's the absolute wrong focus of your efforts if you want to be a great baker. So you've heard me say it before, baking mistakes are made in the mixer. Baking mistakes are not made in the oven. It's too late by the time it gets to the oven. And if you want to fix your baking mistakes, scrutinize the mixing method that you are using. And I'm not even going to go into the fact that your oven is a big fat liar. All right? That son of a toaster oven has been lying to you for years. And if you don't believe me, get a $5 oven thermometer, put it in there, and compare what the oven thermometer says, a second opinion, to what the beep, 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 beep on your oven is telling you. And I guarantee you, liar, liar, scones on fire. So if you can't bake by time and temperature, if your oven is lying to you, what do? Well, what you can do is assure that you're measuring and scaling your ingredients precisely, that you're combining them into a smooth and uniform batter or dough, you are incorporating air cells, you're developing gluten or texture, you're building the structure of the item with proteins, and you're feeding the leavening agent so your baked good rises. It's really that simple. Sounds like a lot, but I'm going to break it all down for you today, and it is going to be simple by the time we're done. Those things all happen in the mixer. And they're so much more important than time and temperature baking. So let's talk about the most important part of baking, the part that really needs no heat at all. Because once you put your item in the oven, you have no control over it anymore. All your control in the process is in the mixer. And as an aside, we're not talking about yeast doughs today. Web Cooking Classes members, they know my 18, 10, and 2 formula for making French baguettes. They know the 10-step yeast dough production method for pizza crusts and my famous beer pretzels, things like that. So we're not going to cover yeast doughs today. The mixing methods that we'll talk about today are for quick breads. They're for cookies, pies, cakes, pastries, not yeast dough products. And the most common is the creaming method. This is the preferred method around the holidays when you're getting ready for your neighborhood cookie exchange. And the creaming method is for cookies, quick breads, and cakes. And really there are 2 goals in the creaming method. It's to trap air by creaming fat and sugar together, and to create an emulsification between the egg and the fat. So it goes like this. Number 1, scale all your ingredients precisely. This is generally by weight. If you want consistency in baking, weigh your ingredients. Even if it says by volume, put the weight in the column. Cream the butter and sugar together to make it light, to make it foamy, to incorporate air. Add the eggs slowly in small increments to create your emulsification. Add all your dry combined ingredients, and then any extracts, flavors, nuts, chips, things like that. But because of the air and the egg, this is always going to yield a much lighter, softer texture product. And depending on the type of leavener, the amount of leavener, and its interaction with other ingredients, this is probably going to be the lightest, the softest, the spongiest type thing that you're going to bake. But what if you don't want soft? What if you don't want cakey and spongy? What if you want something a little more dense, a little more doughy, a little chewier, like a biscuit? Or something dense that could hold up to liquids without getting soggy, like a pie crust? How about something for your afternoon tea? Like a kind of dense, crumbly scone. Well, then you need the biscuit method. And again, I'm talking about the English scone or the American biscuit. This is not the New Zealand or Australian biscuit, not the British biscuit, because the British biscuit is an American cookie. It's just way too confusing, and I digress. It's the biscuit we're talking about, the English biscuit, a scone. And the biscuit method is different than the creaming method because you start out by cutting the fat into the flour, not the sugar. And when you surround flour with fat molecules, you slow down the gelatinization of starches. So what this does is it chokes the flour's ability to absorb liquid and swell. And this is why you get a much more dense product. This is also how you can create a flaky product in pastries that have layers, like a croissant, or layers in your biscuits because of the amount of fat. So let's go over the biscuit method. It goes like this. Scale all ingredients precisely. Yeah, that's right. Cut the fat into the flour, creating larger pieces for a flaky dough or smaller pieces for a mealy dough. And you'll see that in a lot of my pie dough lessons. Add any liquid ingredients to the fat and flour mix, and then knead the dough to develop gluten and further combine the ingredients. This type of dough is usually rolled out and cut. This is where your cookies, your cakes, your biscuits, your scones are cut. They're all very nice. They're all really good, but we haven't even talked about my favorite, the wet and dense, gooey, chewy brownies. Don't you just love a perfectly made blueberry muffin where it's soft and moist and it has the whole blueberries in it, not blueberries that explode and have blue streaks throughout? Well, if you want to do this right, you need the muffin method. And the great thing about the muffin method is you don't need any talent. You don't need any experience or anything to do the muffin method. And there isn't even a goal in the muffin method other than creating a consistent batter. The muffin method's unique characteristic is that it uses liquid fats. So it's usually melted butter, but a lot of times it can be vegetable oil, melted fats in the muffin method. So anytime you see a formula that tells you to melt the butter first, you know the muffin method is coming. So the liquid fat or the oil in a muffin method product, it weighs the thing down. It weighs the product down. It's harder for the leavener to work. It's harder for moisture to evaporate in a fatty environment, and it's more difficult for flour to absorb liquid. This is what makes you dense, chewy, gooey brownies. And this method is so simple, it was the method of choice for your Easy Bake Oven. Did you have one as a kid? The Easy Bake Oven? Ladies? Guys? I don't know. What did you do? You opened the little tiny box of batter, you mixed it with some water and a little bit of vegetable oil, and you put your little mini cake that got baked from a light bulb, from the heat of a light bulb. Baked your cake. It was genius. Well, there's a muffin method that's being used there, so we don't need a mixer to cream things. We don't need to cut fat into flour with knives or pastry shredders, things like that. So here's the muffin method. For those of you keeping score at home, guess what the first one is? Measure and scale all ingredients precisely, usually weighing is best. And step 2, combine all the ingredients until it's thoroughly mixed. All right, let's talk about cakes now. What we talked about just before, cookies, quick breads, scones, muffins, things like that, brownies. But if you've ever made an angel food cake, a souffle, if you've ever done chocolate mousse, then you've used the sponge method. And the sponge method uses a whipped up egg foam usually to incorporate more air and set the structure of the item. Sometimes it's a whole egg foam. Sometimes it's an egg yolk foam. It can be an egg white foam, and that yields a different product, right? But the entire goal in the sponge method is to capture air in whipped egg. Think about an angel food cake. So sponge mixing method goes like this. Number 1, Scale all ingredients precisely, measure things precisely on a scale. A weight scale is best. Whip warmed eggs. Take your whole eggs, put them in a little bit of warm water first. 110 degrees Fahrenheit is the optimal temperature for eggs to absorb air and liquids, things like that. Your warmed eggs with sugar and salt to create a foam. Then you add any liquid, if any. Sometimes there's milk, and then you add any dry ingredients. So a sponge cake method, important thing about this is it has to be baked right away, because the foam is going to continue to lose air. As soon as you have to be careful about the way you pour it in the pan. You can't bang it around because you can lose all that air. It's mechanical. It's being trapped in that way. So sponge cakes have to go in the oven right away. They can't sit around. But now, if you really want to get fancy, you want to challenge yourself around the mixer. If you want to try and get as much fat into a cake as possible, then you need the chiffon method. And this is something Grandma probably did. It's a big thing in the 50s. Chiffon cakes and angel food cakes are both based on egg white foams, but the angel food cake is fat-free. The chiffon cake uses a batter of flour, egg yolks, vegetable oil, and water that's then folded into the egg white foam. So chiffon cakes, because they're so heavy, they now need a leavening agent, because they're so much heavier than an angel food cake. So a chiffon cake is going to get baking powder or baking soda. If there's already an acidic ingredient in it, you'll get baking soda. So the cake can seem as light as an angel food cake, but it has a lot more fat in it. And the chiffon method goes this way. Number 1, scale all ingredients precisely. Then you make a batter from the oil, the yolks, the water, any flavorings, and flour. You make it very pasty. It looks like a brick mortar almost. And you whip it into egg whites. Whip egg whites to soft peaks, and then you whip the batter and the foam together. Fold them together, generally. And because of the foam, again, this cake needs to meet the heat very quickly as well. So chiffon is the richer cousin of an angel food cake. And here's the idea that I want to stick in your head as you go through continue baking this week or in the coming weeks for the holidays. We already know there are only 7 ingredients that you need to worry about, so let's not worry about what you are going to bake. Find yourself a formula that you like for muffins or cookies, brownies, scones, biscuits, anything. Look at how they are telling you to mix the item. Never mind about the ingredients. How do they want you to do it? Go right to the bottom. What are they telling you to do? You're going to recognize the creaming method right away if they tell you to mix the butter and the sugar together in the second step to incorporate air. The first step, of course, is scale your ingredients precisely. Or you're going to notice the biscuit method right away if they say to mix the flour and the fat together. You might even say, hey, that's the muffin method. I get that, when it's calling for a melted fat to be mixed up with everything at the same time. And once you identify any one of these methods being used in the mixing, then go ahead and change it. Take that brownie formula. Instead of using melted butter, use a cold butter and cream it with the sugar instead. Change the brownie formula from a muffin method to a creaming method and see what the difference is. The blueberry muffins that you've been making with the creaming method, try melted butter this time and see what happens. Do you want cakier scones? Use the creaming method instead of the biscuit method. So now you're going to start to look at baking formulas entirely different from now on. You're not only going to be able to recognize the role that each of the ingredients play, like baking soda or the eggs or the flour, but now you're going to be able to recognize the method that was used to bring them together. Swap out the methods and you get a whole new product. And next, what happens? What happens during that baking process? And how can you do that even better? Okay, I got you covered with that too. Let's go through it quickly, because if you're a carefree cook, if you're a lifetime member of web cooking classes, you've heard this from me before, just in another form. So let's bring it all together now. Let's fully understand that thing that you're about to put in the oven. You paid a lot more attention to mixing it this time, and now it's going into the oven. Let's forget about time and temperature, but we've used a combination of our 7 ingredients. We've chosen the appropriate mixing method for those ingredients. We put it in the right pan, and now it's time to meet the heat. And here's what happens. First is the formation of gases. Gases are responsible for leavening your product, and they're released by yeast, baking soda, baking powder, or steam. Those are your leaveners. And as the gases are heated, they expand and they leaven your product. Second is the trapping of gases. As the gases are formed and they start to expand, they're trapped in a stretchable network formed by proteins in the dough. Sometimes it's gluten, sometimes it's egg protein, but without proteins, the gases would escape and you'd have a flat product. Third is the gelatinization of starches. The starches in your mixture, they start to absorb liquids and they expand, they become firmer. Then comes the coagulation of proteins. At this point, the proteins start to solidify when they get hot enough. And this process gives most of the structure to your baked good. But here's where the baking temperature does become important, because if the temperature is too high, coagulation starts before the gases form. It gives you a brick with a split crust where the gas eventually escaped through one big hole in the top. So the structure was set first before the gases could leaven it. If the temperature is too low, the proteins may not coagulate, and there's no structure for the gases to lift. This is a enactment, my artistic dance interpretation. They escape, and your baked good just lays on the bottom of the pan. It's lifeless, no structure. Next is evaporation of moisture, and this actually takes place throughout the entire baking process. The item continually loses moisture. It's in a hot oven. That's what ovens do. But what most cooks, home cooks don't realize is how much moisture is lost in baking and how it steals the size and the volume from your baked goods. If you've ever filled a pan and came out with a cake like that, like, oh, I got to put more in next time. And this is a whole nother lesson, but if you put a 1 pound or a half kilo of bread dough in the oven, you're only going to get about 80% of that weight back. You actually need a dough that weighs 18 ounces to get a 16-ounce loaf. But, okay, another story. Next is the melting of shortenings, the melting of shortenings. Different fats, different shortenings melt and release trapped gases at different temperatures. That's why the type of fat used in baking is so important. Some hold a lot of air, some don't. We talked about this last week. Lastly is crust formation and browning. This is the caramelization of sugars in baking. And the sugars can come from the batter or the dough. They can come from an egg wash, from lactose in milk. It could be a sugar wash, dissolved sugar that you brush over your item. It can be from jellies and jams and condiments, anything that contains sugar. And lastly, I promised you we talk about baking temperatures, even though you cannot trust your oven. So here's the simple key to baking temperatures. Focus on your leavener. That's what decides how hot the oven should be. Whatever the leavening agent is, that will tell you quickly that you need to get that thing rising up in the oven and how to do it. So quick breads and cookies that are using a chemical leavener like baking soda, they need a little bit more time in the oven. It's not the heat that's leavening the cookies. Remember this, that your items don't bake because of the heat or rise because of the heat. They rise because of the chemical reaction that the heat creates. So most quick breads are going to be baked around 350 degrees Fahrenheit or 177 degrees Celsius. But yeast breads are entirely different. The yeast, it needs to expel even more carbon dioxide. And one of the best lifts that your loaf lift, one of the best loaf lifts the yeast can give you, it's called oven spring. And oven spring is that last dying breath of yeast, a living organism, and we need a high temperature to do that. And that's why yeast leavened breads are usually baked around 400 to 425 degrees, or about 200 degrees Celsius. And then there are mechanically leavened items like popovers. Yorkshire pudding, beignets, donuts. Since they're leavened by steam, we need to make that steam really quickly. We don't have a lot of time to waste for steam. And that's why these items are baked at 450 degrees Fahrenheit and up, or about 230 degrees Celsius. They build up a steam engine that you're going to need to raise the roof. So they blow up that steam, the coagulation of protein set, and that's why you got flaky pastries like croissants. They need this high temperature for quick leavening, quick browning, while still staying soft and tender. So the less your leavener needs heat, the less heat you have to give it. And everything else in the baking process is just going to happen naturally. It'll stiffen, it'll dry out, it'll eventually get brown, but how fast this happens is all dictated by the leavening agent. Okay, so forget about the recipes, time and temperature, start scrutinizing ingredients, mixing method, leavener, and baking time. And really, what I've just shown you is the path to understanding baking on a professional level, on a very high level, if you understand these relationships. And it's the way that I understand what happens when I choose ingredients, when I mix them in a certain way, when I bake them at the appropriate temperature dictated by the leavening agent. It's the way baking was taught to me in culinary school. And it's the way that I want to pass it on to you, because it's taught all wrong everywhere else. Know your 7 ingredients, know 5 basic mixing methods, and pick your temperature based on the leavener. That's what baking is all about, Charlie Brown. And with the holidays approaching, that means it's baking season. And this year, I want you to look at the baking formulas you use in a different way. Look at the ingredients first and note to yourself what their role is in the finished product. Then look at the mixing method. Is it sugar and fat cream? Is it melted butter? Is it cut fat into flour? That is going to give you the expectation of whether your item is going to be dense and chewy or light and cakey. And if you don't like it that way, then use the other method and make it the way that you do like it. You're probably going to be using butter, and let's get back to the true or false today. Yeah, butter is up to 15% water. It's true. Butter is an emulsification of 3 ingredients: milk solids, butter fat, and water. European butter has less than 15% water, meaning more butter fat, meaning honestly, much better butter. Hey, look, if you know someone who could use the keys to the concepts behind baking and they got about 30 minutes to spare at their computer, please like and share this video with them. Maybe they'll share their awesome baked goods with you in return. And if you've been struggling, if you're stuck in a rut with the same meals and a limited variety, then you are going to love this week's free online class, because it combines the step-by-step cooking methods with the creative ideas that are going to get your juices going. The class is called the Meal Multiplier Formula to Get Dinner Done, and I share my 6-element formula for inventing meals on the fly. And you can choose your time from the upcoming class times at webcookingclasses.com/multiply. Hey everyone, Chef Todd Moore. Until next Tuesday, where we take even more steps toward breaking the Carefree Cooks Code. This is Chef Todd Moore reminding you there's a method to your baking success too. Bye everyone.